Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, leading in charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me today is marketing and leadership segment, marketing and communications expert and co-host Craig Pagely. How are you doing, Craig?
Kevin, I'm great. Yeah, thanks. Good to be chatting again today on, believe it or not, the 200th episode of our Lunchtime Marketing and Leadership.
Craig, it's 200 episodes I mentioned it recently again to someone that what people don't understand about podcasting is the general consensus is if you get to 25 podcasts, you're winning at podcasting. Yes, for 200 is pretty remarkable. And yeah, so well done, Craig, and thank you for being on that side of this conversation because if it wasn't for you, it wouldn't happen, right? It's because it's a lot of effort and a lot of work, but you've shown up for the show every single week in ways that no one else has. So thank you.
Well, thank you again, for the opportunity. But how's this? Yeah, I can absolutely remember the day, Kevin, going back to the 18th of January, 2021. Ingrid von Stein, published, in fact, Donald, you know Ingrid incredibly well also. Uh, but Ingrid presented an opportunity for me to be a guest on your show. And the very next day after that first show, Ingrid phoned back and said, well, Kevin actually wants you to co-host the show with him. And I went, oh my God, what now? And here we are, some 4 years later, 4 years, 3 months later, 200 shows later. Wow. And again, just to reiterate, it was an absolute honor for me to be the guest on your show. I really do appreciate it. And for our listeners, Kevin, the topic we covered on our first ever show together was that of WhatsApp's privacy policy update and the threat to share user data with the parent company, Facebook. And as we know, this is still a hugely contested topic with the focus shifting, from the elimination of third-party cookies to this often and quite often unscrupulous issue around data sharing of first-party data these days. So a topic that still has relevance, but in a different guise.
Yeah, I remember that. And it was such a big thing because Meta actually brought out, everyone has to click on this and they have to accept the fact that it's privacy. And everyone was up in arms and like trying to go to a new channel. And it was one of the first, I think, very obvious conversations we had around how important data is becoming in our world. And yeah, I mean, I remember that quite clearly.
And it's just on the point, that was really a key moment where the likes of Telegram actually, found its mojo and momentum. And there are a lot of folks who switched from Twitter, WhatsApp, Facebook, all of the other challenging platforms into the realm of apparently the secure private environment called Telegram. And, it is still around, but definitely I don't believe it evolved to the extent that I think everybody thought it might have. But I could be wrong. I'm not a user of it, but that's just my gut.
Yeah, I also know that people use Telegram for different reasons. So, and not as much as a work function as WhatsApp is and has become. But yeah, there are different reasons for it. Craig, so to celebrate our 200th show together, we are kicking off today with a special guest joining us.
Absolutely, Kevin. Yeah, so it is great to have a guest, and thank you to our guest. I'm not going to mention his full name yet, but thank you to our guest for showing up to join us, Kevin. I have mentioned the gent in question to you a few times in the past, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce him to you in person or visually, as I'd say, via our new fantastic platform link that we're piloting today. Kevin, please meet Donald Mokgale. Donald's a young man that I've known since before our first ever show, believe it or not. He's a friend, former colleague, and most definitely a highly respected industry associate.
Welcome to the show, Donald. It's great to meet you. And thanks for making some time to join us. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
And thank you very much. I am very honored to be invited to be part of the show. I'm excited to reconnect with Craig as always, and it's an absolute pleasure to meet you, Kevin. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you guys.
Brilliant, Donald. Thank you. So Kevin and our listeners, I think, yeah, the reason, just to put it out there, the reason that I've invited Donald to join us on the show today is that, yeah, you and I have been on an incredible journey to get to this particular point in time. It's a journey of consistency to get to our 200th show, no mean feat. And I've known Donald for many years, and Donald too has been on an incredible journey. And much like us, he still is on that incredible journey. But it's around this very topic of his journey that I'd like to shape a good deal of today's conversation and really delve into some parts of Donald's journey and try and find alignment with where we're at, but then pick up on some other sort of intrinsic nuances in terms of where the next step of his journey is. But yeah, Kevin, before getting into our chats on the journey today, I'd like to give Donald the introduction he deserves, and obviously referencing the go-to for the overview of successful people, I'm going to reference Donald's LinkedIn profile for a while. So Donald started out in the world of media almost 18 years ago when he joined a really successful out-of-home advertising business called Wide Open Platform. Donald joined as outdoor advertising sales executive. 3.5 years later, Donald then joined Posterscope SSA as account director, and that is where we met for the first time. As I was actually MD of Posterscope SSA, I then left in April 2016 after just under 5 years at the helm, and went on my own journey into the world of independence. And you know, you've known me in that particular guise. And this was actually a role that Donald was able to take on almost a year later after joining Posterscope. Donald stepped into the role of MD. Donald then continued a really exciting journey in the world of media, culminating as MD of Avatar Media Agency in June 2023, having spent a couple of other years within the Dentsu group where Posterscope was a resident agency. And then a year later, Donald too stepped out of the corporate world, also as a consultant, and he continued his successful endeavors as a poet, creative director, and narrator. And I have to say, Kevin, I had the honor of seeing Donald in his narration realm. Really incredible slam poets, totally blown away by the concept of the new art form that I was introduced to. And during this time, his journey led Donald to co-write a book with another superhuman being who I had the privilege of meeting, that being Ernest and Komacek. They published a book titled Introducing Hibirism in the meantime. And while today's conversation is not about the book, because he's had really good airtime in that particular realm, it will be great to reference one or two key concepts that have stood out for me in the book. And just, you know, here is the book. I've read it. I've got one or two little tags and areas I want to pick up on. And then just moving into current times, Donald is the MD at Moya app. And Donald, you know, when you talk about your journey, you might want to just reference some of that. Officially welcome to the show, Donald.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm welcome, and yeah, I'm excited. I appreciate the privilege.
Donald, so as Craig mentioned, you've had an incredible journey, obviously one where you've encountered struggles and hardships. As motivation to our listeners, please can you share some insights of where you come from and what your journey's been like into a highly specialized world of media?
Oh my gosh. I was born and bred in Johannesburg, and for the better part of my early childhood, grew up in the East Rand, in Tembisa, in a township. But as you all know, top 10 townships size-wise, at least in the country. Tembisa, I grew up in Tembisa. The hardships are probably as real as one might imagine. Living in a one room with both my parents, right? So they're both working, both hustling. That was my childhood. That was my upbringing. And we since moved in the East Rand as well to another, smaller township called Leachville, opposite another township called Wattville, which incidentally is where Oliver Tambo is from, alongside a few other kind of well-established, I suppose, figures like Vusi Tembegwayo, also from Wattville, and a few others. Ernest Nkumunche is also from Wattville. So grew up in the township in the East Rand for the most part. My hardships climbing multiple taxis just to get to one destination, living in a dangerous environment, in a space where there's very limited access to libraries and proper access to things. That was just the general hardship, right? Which is, I think, very typical of a young Black South African growing up in the township. These are typical struggles, as it were. Then, of course, the major one being access to funding. I went to a high school called William Hills. It sounds like a private school, but it's not. It's a public school in an Indian township called Actonville in Benoni. Look, it had great teachers, man, but limited resources. So very underfunded, very difficult environment growing up in. So it really needed to be competitive. But then I went to go study advertising. And originally I wanted to be an actor. My parents said, listen, don't be crazy. There's no money there. You're not doing that. Find something else to study. And the irony, of course, for me is that I discovered advertising as a profession, at least through generations. The script obviously being based on the advertising industry. That's where I started researching it. And I was like, I really like this. And so I went to go study at Boston Media House and then, ran out of funding and I needed to go find a job. That's how I landed up at Wide Open Platform, is that I did my first year via a student loan. And then the second year they rejected it because my parents at the time had a terrible credit record. So they didn't allow us to get another loan. So I needed to go find a job. So what I did is I went to go find a job in the industry so I can do two things. One, get started already. And two, hopefully negotiate for them to pay for my funds that I had recently learned, at the time at least, that there was tax benefits. They could claim back a portion of that money via tax. So the moment I got the job, I negotiated that. I said, listen, you can reduce my pay. I don't care about that. Pay for my fees, claim it back from tax. So then, it's a win-win. And they were like, okay, we like this guy, So that's kind of how I got into media. And and I was all the more happy for it because it really is like a very, very passionate space for me.
I love the principle of you were negotiating and hustling right from the get-go, Donald. That's fantastic. The ultimate salesman. Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting is the fact that you didn't go formally into acting, probably great advice by your parents. You've actually gone full circle because in essence you are an actor. You're a poet. You're a producer. You're on stage often. You're narrating. You're definitely an actor in a different class. So yeah, great to listen to your folks, but great that you found your own journey there, Donald. Yeah. So for me, having seen you in action more than once, when did you realize that you actually had this latent talent? And how did you actually come about and realize that you had the talent? And then was there any inspiration from anybody close to you, or was it something that you stumbled upon that led you to that particular point of that creative?
Great question. I realized I had the talent very early, man. I started acting at the age of 6. I led my first play in primary school, and the teachers specifically chose me because they said that I was very bold and confident, right? So I've always been a very gregarious person. I've got high energy. And so I've been like that since I was a child. So the thing that would always fascinate the adults around me is, wow, what a talkative, smart kid. He speaks well. He does this. And I remember in vernacular, there's a phrase called unesbindi or unalisbete, which means that this kid has got courage, he's very bold, very confident. So they'd say that a lot, and I didn't know what it meant. So I used to ask my mom, what is this? What is this? If you direct translate it, it means you have liver. And you might have seen a few marketing campaigns using that phrase, you have liver, which means you have courage, basically, right? So I would ask them, what is this liver thing that people keep referring to, right? And they'd say, no, it means you've got confidence. You've got. So at the age of 6 already, when they put me as a kind of a lead in a stage play at school where it would be seen by the whole primary school, that's when I knew, okay, this is clearly my thing, which is how I landed at the fact that I want to act, is because that's just what I do. Standing on stage, performing in front of people, speaking publicly. I'm not shy at all. That concept of being shy and afraid to speak was just foreign to me. It's like I always used to say Einstein didn't know he couldn't be a genius, right? So the idea of not knowing the negative, right? Not knowing the limitation is precisely the thing that propels you to kind of unleashing your potential. So that was the first kind of step into that. And then the second was, naturally over time, I just was more and more leaning towards performance arts, public speaking, all those things. And then the inspiration just came from, watching TV and seeing kind of the best, film stars. And I said, I want to do that. Yeah, as much as on the one hand, my parents gave good advice and I like it, but I would have approached it in the most competitive fashion ever because I am competitive. That's why when I went into slam poetry, I made sure I win the slam competitions and, I win the awards, I win the number because I'm like that, right? So even with acting, I theoretically would have approached it the exact same way. I would have been competitive. I would have made sure I crack Hollywood, I crack whatever needs to be cracked at the highest levels. So yeah, the inspiration, I suppose, for me came from just the love of art as in everything to do with art, everything to do with storytelling. The idea of telling stories was such a passion of mine. I went into hip hop. I started freestyle rapping and ciphers, got into poetry and everything that had to do with just expressing oneself, but in a way that's at least has some level of intellectual grounding, right? Some substance, some thought, some depth behind it. So it's not just performing for the sake of it. There has to be a story. There has to be a plot. There has to be a point that we're making. So any art form that did that, I by default was attracted to, I gravitated towards. And so that the spoken word became my favorite. And so, yeah, I just found myself in all of those artistic spaces and I just wanted to thrive. So I started doing theater shows, theater auditions, and all of those things. I started doing theater. So that's how I fell in love with the arts.
Donald, what fascinates me is the sort of the formats of that new art form, slam poetry, some of the other channels and formats that you were experimenting in were obviously channels that were well utilized by the underground and by black groupings to express the dissatisfaction of where South Africa was at a particular point in time and how, the movement into the new realm was a necessity and just this beautiful platform of being able to express to the truisms of what you were experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that fascinated me the most about slam poetry is the creativity of it all, right? So obviously being an advertising mind, being an artistic mind, the thing that I wanted to do that was different to just being great at slam poetry was I was heavily concerned by the fact that there was no clear path to make money and be successful in it as like, how do I make money out of this thing that I'm really good at? And so, and that's where I started performing in corporate spaces. And because I started realizing, wait a minute, poetry is seen as this esoteric thing that only like these weirdos, deep thinkers, philosophers, potheads go to, right? Which is in one sense, it's true, but in the other, it isn't because those people are telling stories of the society we all live in. But those stories don't get to the average person because two things happen. One, it's too niche. And two, when they do express themselves, it's got too much jargon, too much airy fairy stuff. It's not straightforward. It's not as hard hitting. It's not witty. It's not funny. It doesn't have enough humor. It doesn't have the things that we like about entertainment. And so I took that approach and applied it to slam poetry and put it in corporate spaces. And oh my God, it exploded. So then I started building my profile as a slam poet who performs in corporate spaces. And ultimately it led to me registering a business with another slam poet who had the same mindset as me. His name is KB.
Right.
And we registered a business called Puns and Things, which is a storytelling business that focuses on poetry and music at the heart of it. So we play with words and we tell stories. So I use the marketing mindset, which is understanding audiences. So who are we
Yes.
performing? Who are we telling the stories to? So understanding those nuances. So we write in such a way that it'll appeal very generically or as relevant as possible to that audience. So including, but not limited to using the right jargon. If it's a very sector specific thing, if it's a mining sector, we'll write puns around mining, right? And minerals and community, but it'll be witty, it'll be fun, it'll be quirky, it'll be entertaining, it'll be inspiring. So I just, that's where I took my slam poetry skills to apply it in such a way that it starts making actual sense. It's valuable and that companies and, potential clients are willing to actually put money behind. And so, yeah, it exploded from there. That's kind of where I did things a little bit differently to the rest of the slam poets that were around at the time.
Donald, I love it. And I'm just listening intently. I've made some notes. A while ago on the show, I spoke to a lady. She was from the US. One of the key things that she mentioned, and that's clearly coming through in just, how you articulate and speak about your own journey. She said, never forget that your mess is your message.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to the successes that you've had and the trajectory and taking something that you're passionate about and creating something, and how do you do that and how do you pull it into making money out of it, right? And especially in South Africa, because it's hard in South Africa. It's harder, I believe. And It's listening to that. You often don't know the stories, the backstories where people have come from and the things they struggle with and, and what they've gone through. But, the lesson of when I've learned that, your mess is actually your message. And I think it ties in so beautifully to how you sort of share and showcase what you say and what you do,
100%.
because it's almost like tying the becoming of Donald into this showcasing. So it's fascinating hearing it in such a short time now, your story and how that's played out for you.
Thank
Build
you.
on that. And I really like that phrase, your message, Kevin. Donald, how did all of this impact on your family? What did your parents think of this particular journey, and how did that influence them in their view of the world, in the way they understood these new art forms and things like it? Did they think you were an absolute lunatic? Did they think you were being, quite revolutionary in the way you were portraying yourself and things like that?
Going to tell stories in corporates, like what the hell?
Wild. So I've always been a little bit different, man, growing up. So I've always been a little bit of an anomaly in all the spaces that I occupied from the time I was a kid. Like you see, already this courage thing, this confidence thing. So in their minds, they had already branded me as this kid is very smart. He's different. He has a kind of a different energy. So already they knew that I'm likely going to do some really strange things as I continue to get older. So I think they were mentally prepared for that. So the moment I started talking about auditions and performing in theater, they immediately were like, oh, okay, we know he's been like that since he was a kid, right? And obviously the side to me that they hadn't seen is me performing live on stage. That's the side to me they had never seen because, obviously they hadn't been able to attend any of those performances. So as I started speaking about, telling stories to corporates, they always supported it because they knew that whatever I end up doing is probably going to be cool and it's probably going to be rewarding because I always had a knack for doing stuff that was somewhat productive. Like I'll give an example. In the book Introducing Hibirism, there's a chapter called Polluting and Littering Minds, where we speak about how hardcore and difficult it is to be an intellectual growing up in a township. So you love knowledge, reading books, how you get quickly ostracized because that's not common. That's not a casual currency. It's like they would say things like, you read too much, you're going to go crazy, so stuff like that. So already I was coming from that kind of background where I'm already doing slightly different things. And so by default, I'm attracting people who are like me, who like reading, who like knowledge, who like debates. So they've always known that something crazy like that would be something surely I would do. So then I started sharing these ideas with my parents to say, guys, what I've learned is I've got this talent for poetry, but these corporates are tired of the same old entertainment. If they don't bring a comedian who's worn out and is overused or a band that's kind of there, there's really nothing else that's quirky, that's interesting. I can present something that's interesting, that can be made bespoke, tailor-made for the audience, bespoke for the event, and still be wildly entertaining, right? So I packaged up the slam poetry sets and started writing custom poetry. So they immediately thought, Jesus, this kid is crazy, but we trust it because his craziness has been producing results over all these years, right? So that's kind of where they started just like trusting me. They started trusting my judgment, and they realized, I think, at some point that that's my 360 moment, that I'm going back to the very acting that they said I shouldn't do, but I've just repackaged it in a way that's a little bit more meaningful and then obviously more relevant to where I'm at live stage wise, right? So interestingly, even in my roles as leading agencies and things like that, at pitches, there was a point in which I started incorporating a little bit of the slam poetry into the pitch itself. I remember in one Coke pitch, I did a piece that I custom wrote just for the pitch where I was playing with words using the names of the Coke brands themselves, and it was wildly entertaining. It was a perfect kind of icebreaker in that pitch. There's always been, I've always been a proponent of utilizing creativity in every space you occupy because it's everywhere. Everybody has capacity to appreciate art and beautiful things. And so I don't think there's a space where it should not be present, So to go from that to performing for the president, I remember, I don't even remember what year it was. It might have been 2012, 2013. Was performing for the president, this massive fundraising dinner. And I needed to inspire the guys about, kind of where the next elections were going, what the future of South Africa was. And I wrote a poem about dreams. It's actually on YouTube, where I was just talking about, like, let's not forget where we come from. Let's not forget where we're going as a country. And so performing in spaces like those, where I went from this concept of performing in in corporate spaces to performing for the president and these big corporate, these red carpet gala dinners. It was just such a 360 moment for me, you know? So yeah, it's certainly been a passion of mine. And I'm not done yet because I feel like, you know, it's not a real business if I'm still needed for me to make money, right? It's a real business if I can sleep and still make money. So that's the next phase of the evolution of that artistic business. And I have a really, really big idea on how to turn poetry to a full-time job for young students who might not have the funds to go study, but want to be poets and actually earn money. So yeah, that's the next phase of growth for me.
It's amazing. I mean, one of the things that we highlighted here is, you know, we're not specifically talking about the book, but I mean, you did write this book, and it's interesting. I did an AI search on this, and I was like asking my AI, tell me more about this introducing Hibirism, and it gave me a final interpretation. So, and I thought I'd share it because it's quite funny. But you can correct it if it's out. But
I think so. Hibirism is obviously a word we neologized. We created this word from scratch, right? So it came from the root word hibiri, which comes from a very popular song, Sister Bettina, which you probably would have heard during the last Rugby World Cup. The original artist of that song, his name is Mkharimbe. He was basically called again to go redo the song Ama Boka Boka, which is used the exact same instrumental melody and style of Sister Bettina, the original song that actually made him blow up. So it's become infused in South African culture, that song. So whenever it plays, people just lose their marbles. So we took that word hibiri and added ism at the end, capitalized the H and gave it a definition, which is to say it's a problem-solving lens. It's a problem-solving lens. You can look at, it's another way to look at life. Right? It's a framework. It's a lens. That's why on the cover you see the guy holding binoculars. That's what it is. It's a lens that's a transferable subjectivity. So
Absolutely.
that AI is definitely.
Thank you for the clarity. But so why did you co-write the book? I mean, you've touched on it now, but tell us more about what was the intention, and how did you get to this point?
So at some point, just before I came back to South Africa, I had immigrated to go live in Ghana to go start up one of our offices. And while living there, I was in a very interesting mode of being at the time, right? I'm a philosopher, but I'm a poet. I'm always thinking about deep concepts. So I'm always thinking about like, what is the meaning of life? And in that time, I was also thinking about my African identity, right? And I've always been fascinated, especially by Ghana and the history, you know, and Kwame Nkrumah, one of the best African leaders ever. So I was studying the political history of that country. And while living there, I was just psychologically in a space where I was questioning Black identity and what it really means in the 21st century. How do we redefine it? How do we make it more meaningful? Because I was tired of the age-old argument of woe is me, oh, colonization happened to us, oh, racism this. I was tired of that. I felt like it's a one-dimensional argument. Yes, it's well documented, but what about the other aspects that actually are progressive, that leads us to progressing, right? Let's move forward. And so in that space, Ernest and I, the philosopher now, the co-author of the book, so I'm a seasoned marketer, he's a philosopher. We came together and we were arguing and debating about this Black identity thing. And so in it, I saw an opportunity to, because the more we spoke, the more the Hibirism lens was being formulated. And we started realizing, wait a minute, there's actually a way in which we can look at this identity thing. There's a way in which we can actually understand the world slightly differently. And that was through the lens of just cultural nuance and being able to really zoom into cultural nuances. That's one. The second thing was in the lens, we started developing the idea of flipping concepts on their head and just seeing the unseen from the seen. That's also what the lens does, right? So it allows you to see things that ordinary people don't see. Like you will see a room, but I will see a corner and I'll see about how the right angle of that corner reflects something about the light. Like there's some crazy imagination. Think about like free economics where it shows you, let's call it parallels in concepts that seemingly don't even seem like they're connected. We created a whole concept in the book called gross domestic orgasm, because in that chapter we're arguing that it's a new measure. Instead of GDP, you're measuring orgasms, and we're arguing that the more orgasms the country receives, the better the economic performance, right? So it's really crazy concepts, but when we unpack it, you realize there's depth and thought and research behind each of the things. They sound outlandish at first, right? But then the more you read it, they sound paradoxical. But the more you read it, the more you realize, wait a minute, these guys are actually making sense. So it came from us consistently building on the lens. And that's how we co-authored it. We decided, let's actually co-author. The original title of the book was called Anybody Can Be a Hibirist, because we understood that this is a transferable subjectivity. It's a lens that we can share with anybody, regardless of race, of creed, of age, of country. And we can go in any market and you will find Hibirists there. They just don't know that they're Hibirists because the language of Hibirism was not existent. So we had to create the language to articulate concepts and lexicon of things that unfortunately, there's no language for. If I ask you this, Kevin, how do you describe a thing which makes a massive impact commercially, which has cultural nuance at the heart of it, and also flips a concept on its head? What word in the dictionary can you find to describe?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
not firstly, like not specifically.
So Hibirism had to be that. And so in the book, we also just articulate that that's what we're describing. We're describing, things that are not necessarily new, but firstly, when you aggregate them in a particular way, there's a powerful insight that you can get out of it that was otherwise, non-articulated in the past. And so that's how we got to co-author the book. What's interesting, I think, about the co-authoring in particular is how we write in the first person, right? Use the word I a lot in the book, and you'll see that. And we say that in the introduction to say the reason we do that is a metaphorical trope to demonstrate how transferable the subjectivity is. Of course, there are chapters where Ernest will peek his head out to say, this is Ernest and I think this, especially when we differ on something. And I'll say, this is Donald and I think that. But for the most part, you will see we write in the subjective I as if we're one person, even though we're not. But the metaphorical trope there is just the transferable subjectivity. So that's how we got to co-author the book, is those debates and obviously the formulation of the lens of Hibirism, as it were.
I just, just want to like comment on that, Craig, is that what I think, and I thank you for the clarity because it's important. Part of what I take away from what you've just said is the importance of the Black identity, right? And I think, I've been, because I work in leadership a lot and I, do a lot of engagement with leadership across the board. One of the sort of threads that people don't have reference to it is an African Black identity. Like they don't have, especially in leadership, right? And a lot of the time it's negatively connotated and, there's nuances but yet, if you look at some of the background and the stories and the history of the African cultures, there are such beautiful stories that come out of that, right? So I think,
Right.
just touching on that, and it's so beautiful to hear that you guys have gone to that degree of unpacking it, because it speaks to Black leadership in a way that no one anticipates. And the fact that you've just come up with this whole Hebraism kind of language and you packaged it and you're getting people to think around, what if it is this thing? I love that, and I think it's a necessary conversation to have. Right?
Thank you, Kevin.
So,
I
so
appreciate
Donald,
that.
we alternate the months of subject matter and topics. Last month was leadership, coaching, mentoring. This month is about marketing, communications, brand, etc. And in light of the fact that you're on the show in this particular month of topic, I'm quite intrigued to get to understand the receptivity of this concept where you and Ernest have positioned the term Hibirism, but you've taken it a step further and to quote Hibirism as a cultural insights communications business. Okay, and I'm going to ask you, how have you positioned this book, and what is the receptivity been from CMOs, strategists, and the creative minds in this country? But I just want to read one of the important excerpts of the book that really stand out for me as a quantification as to why I see you saw the value in this particular proposition. And it goes to this. It reads as there's a particular paragraph in the chapter titled "We Need an Alternative Order of Symbols," and there's a wonderful paragraph that stands out to me, which for me validated the fact that you're actually using the insights that you've shared in the book as an opportunity to start an insights communications business. And I want to just read this particular paragraph. And it says, people are often fixated on the idea of having luxury brands like red bottoms as a way to symbolize success and a desirable lifestyle. This trend is evident in music videos and on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, where these items become markers of achievement. Bags, shoes, and other luxury products are not only seen as a status symbol, but also serve as tools for social selection. Interestingly, the perceived value of some of these brands is largely relational, shaped by societal condition rather than intrinsic appeal. And, that particular proposition, looking at consumer goods, looking at societal trends and influences, when I read that, I said, oh, he really does understand the marketplace. And I can see why, Ernst, you are moving this particular proposition as Hibirism as a cultural insights communication business.
Yes,
How's
sir.
it been received again by CMO strategists in creative world?
Craig, you won't believe it, man, but it's been explosive to say the least. So we've landed one of our first big clients, which is a big insurance business that's been around, and they loved the proposition as well. And they specifically gave us a very interesting task, which was they had quantitative data like any big business does about their audiences. And they said, listen, we don't know these audiences in real life. Can you give them to life and add your Hibirism lens so we can better understand who these audiences are? And then we said, we'll do you one better. We'll do that. And then we'll do it immersions as well. We'll take you and your team and immerse you guys into the daily lives of these audiences. And we'll pull out insights. We'll put them into a report you can take to EXCO that has multiple implications on product, on marketing, on comms, on client service, and on culture in terms of your business. So we did that blueprint, and you know, we're presenting it to the EXCO in the next coming days, and there were some really critical questions that they added in as part of our questionnaire design that has a massive implication on their business from a product perspective. And what I loved about that particular client is that they understood that what we're talking about is not just consumer insights at a marketing level. That's just one layer. We're still talking about it from a product perspective. We're talking about it from a client service perspective, because culture as an opportunity for growth permeates the entire organization. It's not just a marketing thing. And so with the business, we were able to come out of that myopia of our industry where they only think about things only from a marketing lens and nothing else, whereas we think about it from a business perspective. So it's been explosive. The media opportunities, the bulk, we've done lectures for multiple universities, and there's more invitations coming. Gibbs are interested in pulling us in. So are Vits around culture, because culture is the next, kind of buzzword, as it were. So people are starting to really look into culture. And we were one of the first to really talk about culture in an elevated way. Because in marketing, when they talk about culture, they talk about subcultures, actually. They talk about hip hop, music, these are all cultural expressions, at least from a sociological and sociological, and what's the word I'm looking for? What do they call those guys that study society and how they organize? The word just completely eluded me, guys. I usually have my words on deck, but for some reason, but it's fine. The point I'm making is we started it at an academic level, and we've infused best practice, our own lived experiences from growing up in the township, and really made it make sense. So when marketers talk about culture and they talk about just hip hop, that's a subculture, it's not hip. There's also microculture. So in terms of the reception with brands and businesses, it has been amazing, right? And now we're starting to find ourselves in a place where we're needing to staff up, essentially. We're needing to staff up and really get our act together, build a team, and really start running at a much higher frequency. I mean, the real vision of the business, it's a business strategy. I mean, we positioned it as an insights communication business in the book only because we knew that that's the easiest way to land. So Kevin, believe it or not,
Yes,
we wrote the
yes,
book to launch the business. So the book is just the foundation of the business. Because if I'm going to sell you the business proposition and I tell you I wrote a book about it, you kind of have to give me the light of day, right? You kind of have to hear me out. You kind of don't have a choice.
yeah.
So that was the marketing strategy. We're going to market this business, but we have to launch a book as the foundation of the business. And then once we've launched it, we start permeating other aspects of the whoever the client is, the business. We solve those problems, and it can go from as simple as designing your staff uniforms to be more culturally nuanced to helping you draft your HR policies to be more inclusive of stuff that's really undocumented. Like how, Kevin, if one of your staff members had what they call UBIs or the calling, how would you manage that? There's no policy in place for somebody to go and be initiated as a traditional doctor and then still come back to corporate work. So stuff like that. There's no policies that exist because that level of culture isn't captured, including but not limited to, if you were to launch in Tanzania, we would help you a draft policy that say this is how you get the best out of Tanzanians. This is how you manage the Tanzanians in Tanzania. Here are nuances you must be aware of. Here are things to avoid. So the culture, as we think, that's what I'm saying. Think about it holistic, not just from a marketing comms perspective. It means also staff, even at product level. Do your products have a cultural acknowledgement of its majority, purchasers? Do you understand who buys your product? And do you understand culturally how you can be more infused into their lives so that, there's ownership? Back in the day, Sunlight Green Bar Soap is passed from generation to generation because We found a way to infuse it in our culture, but the brand didn't do that. It's incidental. We have the formula to help a brand be able to do that by better understanding, people at a cultural level. So you can, that's
And
that.
Donald, what was it? Possibly social anthropology that you were
Yes,
referencing.
anthropology. That is precisely the word I was looking for. So
Yeah,
anthropological.
yeah, because the
Perfect.
embedding, how people live in societies and how they make their life meaningful, that aspect, and the embedding of the soap being part and parcel of that cultural
You saved
nuance.
me.
Okay.
It was going to
Yeah.
bother me so much until I remembered that word. So thank you.
I just want to point to what you were sharing, and the fact that you've gone to this degree of it's almost challenging the norm of how we would skin the cat kind of thing. It's like, and
Yes.
Craig and I we've touched on this conversation around who are the people in the world who are actually challenging the way we do anything. And, who are the leaders out there kind of going, well, why is that normal? And who says that's normal? Right. I mean, even the book that I've written around the wings conversation, it's the work and interesting neutral growth skills around, understanding the evolution of what leadership needs to be doing in the workplace. And, Craig has in-depth knowledge of the book as well already. But it's also just challenging, like, who says that, what we've learned in the last 50 years is the standard practice to anything. Right. And
100%.
I think just listening to how you've unpacked that, it's so important that the Hibirism effect, is considered in how cultures are driven, because we also, in the context of Africans and the diversity, it's like culture's a big thing, we have dynamic people in our countries, and if we just ignore it and kind of go, well, we didn't think of it, like, because whatever process was put in place 50 years ago. Like, but why? So I love the fact
Mm,
that you challenge it to that degree, and people are seeing it and recognizing that it's an important conversation to be having.
and there's business growth opportunity in that conversation. Absolutely. Spot on.
I think the incredible thing for me is that you know you're on the next part of your journey, which in this instance is developing from one state of mind to another, and that too is a great definition of journey. Where is it? What is the next step of your
Mm.
journey as we wrap up the show?
Sure, Craig. I am a serial entrepreneur, man. That is actually part of the problem. Is I am, how Kevin, you quite rightly spoke about challenging the norm, and Craig will probably remember I would say these crazy things even when him and I worked together. I'd always be challenging the norm. Why are things done this way? Why can't we do it this way? Why can't we? So in the very same breath, I also challenge even the way we show up. Like, so yes, at the moment I'm the MD of Moya app, but that's not all I am. I'm also the author of Hibirism, the director of Hibirism. I created multiple other businesses. I own Puns and Things. All of these things are running in parallel. I'm not one thing or another. The same way Kevin is a father, he's a brother. So my next step of evolution is really just teaching, I suppose, in a very real way, the world on how to allow people to be who they are meant to be. And I think that's a really challenging thing. It's going to sound weird saying it like this, but what it is I'm going to be building multiple businesses that are going to be running in parallel, doing different things. Puns and Things is going to solve a very interesting problem that's attached to funerals, but by making poetry a full-time job. That's what it's going to do there. Then I'm going to have Hibirism continue to grow as a business strategy firm. So I'm building what I call a McKinsey. The next McKinsey is coming out of Hibirism Group because with that business, especially across Africa, and we've built the framework to be. It took us 8 years to build it. We've built the kind of framework that allows for the problem solving to happen in any market. So even if we went to Germany today, we'd be able to find local Hiberists in Germany, but teach them the framework so that they can apply the framework for growth. So that's going to be the next McKinsey. Then I'm building Moya app to be the next WeChat for Africa and the BRICS countries, right? Because we've got a data-free proposition in there. Then I'm also building out an out-of-home school. As you know, location marketing and out-of-home, that's my vibe. That's where you and I met. That's my baby. So I'm going to be making it formal. I'm actually going to teach a course, a CTSS certified short course for out-of-home, because the reason why out-of-home spend is as low as it is in the country is because the academic focus on it is already as minuscule. That's why it has that kind of focus on schedule, because they teach you for one chapter for out of home, but that's a whole industry. So the reason out of home is not growing is because the people who make the decisions for it to grow only studied it for one chapter, right? So I'm building a proper school for it with the intention of building an award ceremony for just out of home, but across the region, not just inside. So my next step, it's going to be wild. It's going to be a series of these businesses that I'm going to build. And I'm hoping to attract the right Avengers, as it were, to place the right bums on seats in each of these businesses to help us really build powerful businesses that bring value, that contribute positively to society. But more than anything, start challenging the norms, really, and really just changing the way things are done, because it's 2025. And I think a lot of the old guard are still thinking, in kind of 19th century in the way they approach business, consumers, even things as basic as customer service. So that's the next level of innovation, is building businesses that will, really outlive and outpace these kind of older guard businesses. That's the next step for me.
Fantastic. And we've got an incredible platform to bring some of that storytelling to life again with you and for you.
I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Donald, I love that, in my mind, when you speak about it, there's such, it's quite general. There's things, there's certain terminology that people use as you're really a generalist, you're not a specialist, but there's such specialists happening in that generalist kind of approach. And I think that's one of the things I listen to you and I relate. And I was just thinking, as you guys were speaking today, like we have three creatives sitting in this conversation. From my perspective, I've used my voice since I was 4 years old, and I've been singing since I was 4. And today I do a lot of this, and I still use my voice, and I do a lot of facilitate. It's still a voice kind of thing. So that's sort of where it started, has sort of gone on into different ways, but it's still the same instrument, right? And for you, it's like acting. I mean, Craig, from your perspective, you help people design. You help people design businesses. Right. So, and that's where I see the three creators kind of show up in their own, from my perspective, it's
Paradigms.
contagious identity. And
Yeah.
it really is. What is that contagious identity about that individual? And so what is that thing that really fuels them, no matter at what degree and what it is they're doing, how they do what they do? There's something about them that there's a commonality, and like you say, you do it in such great variety, but it's all still comes down to who Donald's being, right?
Absolutely, Kevin. And that is my sermon right there, as I preach you to be the best version of yourself at all times, regardless of whatever it is you touch. And it should not be limited by, what the world is used to, what society is usually comfortable with, and unfortunately, society likes boxing things, and I don't think like that, but I understand that society thinks like that. And so I show up in a way that for the most part doesn't break too many walls, but strategically does the thing of standing out. That's what I do. But then ultimately, what I would love to do, if it were up to me, is to blow up all these boxes that people have created, and just see Donald for Donald. Donald has an interest in this business, that business. He's also a poet. He's also this. That's Donald. It's not a Donald the marketer. Right. And then now I must only talk marketing with you. But then actually, I also want to talk politics. I also want to talk anthropology. And that's what I'm about. And I really wish, more and more people could just be more open-minded in the way that they approach the world and everything in it. But I appreciate, Kevin, your identifying that golden thread, because clearly we can relate. And again, I know Craig, as a designer, he designs things, period. Even in the way he thinks, he's a designer.
Yeah.
So that's who Craig is, right? In whatever he touches, he'll always be designing things. The way he even approaches conversation is like a designer. He sees it as like a canvas. So I appreciate that about him, because that's what makes him Craig. So I think, yeah, I wish the world learned how to do that more. In fact, just as a parting shot, recently one of my clients was telling me about what it's like to mother a child who's on the autism spectrum. And this child, just to summarize it quickly, is like a Sheldon, that highly, highly, highly functional, highly intelligent, like genius level brilliance, but obviously lacks in the societal, more EQ stuff, right? And so she says to me that raising a child who's on the spectrum has taught her to be a hell of a lot more not only open, but also understanding and empathetic of the differences in all of us, right? Because ordinarily, I imagine if you don't know that somebody's on the spectrum, you would approach them thinking, oh, they're weird. But actually, if you approach people with the open-mindedness of knowing that they may be on the spectrum, because you don't know what you don't know, is you start becoming more tolerant and more empathetic, more accommodating in how in even people's weirdness and quirks. So that really touched me, because I realized, oh my God, actually that is precisely the kind of approach we should have for one another as a whole. Besides boxing each other, let's just approach each other with a particular sensitivity, a particular empathy, and a particular open-mindedness that says, who is this person? And let them tell me who they are, really. And let me respond in kind. And so, yeah, that's kind of my parting shot there. And I just appreciate that that we could have this conversation, and I could at least jump into these many different boxes that I occupy, and not just the one poetry box that I absolutely love, of course, but isn't the singular box that I occupy.
Fantastic. Yeah, Donald, and as you say, in your closing shot, I just want to again thank you for your incredible, valuable contribution to the show today. Some great insights. Well, we could have another chat next week. There's so much to share and talk about, but really, they definitely you've imparted some wonderful words of wisdom, and I know that our listeners are going to gain from that. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate having you on the show, and let's see where all these wonderful ideas go to, and use this platform again to really bring them to life as well.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, gentlemen.
And from my side, Donald, like so wonderful talking to you. But thank you for bringing Hibirism to the world and clarifying, for me. So I like, know exactly what we're talking about. Yeah. And yeah, like you'll see that the show will probably be called Hibirism. So you can just share with other people and tell, this is what it is. Listen there.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope the next time we meet over dinner and over some wine, please.
I think it's a necessary.
Yeah.
We literally should do that. I look
Yes.
forward to just a closing quote for today from Ursula K. Le Guin. I think it's French, Le Guin. She says, "It's good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters in the end."
Mm,
Nice, nice journey
that
that
play
we've
on
been speaking
words. I
about.
love it.
Yeah, it is the journey that matters.
Thank
Fantastic.
you, both of you, for
Thank
an
you.
amazing 200th show celebration. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic conversation. Guys, please remember to like and share at Lunchtime Series every Wednesday and Thursday for myself and Craig and Donald. Have a fantastic week ahead. And yeah, thanks again, guys. We'll chat soon.